One day, Proserpina, the young maiden of spring, was picking wild flowers with her mother, Ceres, the goddess of grain. Entering the cool, moist woods, Proserpina filled her basket with lilies and violets. But when she spied the white petals of the narcissus flower, she strayed far from her mother. Just as Proserpina picked a beautiful narcissus, the earth began to rumble. Suddenly the ground cracked open, splitting fern beds and ripping flowers and trees from their roots. Then out of the dark depths sprang Pluto, god of the underworld. Standing up in his black chariot, Pluto ferociously drove his stallions toward Proserpina. The maiden screamed for her mother, but Ceres was far away and could not save her. Pluto grabbed Proserpina and drove his chariot back into the earth. Then the ground closed up again, leaving not even a seam. When the mountains echoed with Proserpina's screams, her mother rushed into the woods, but it was too late. Her daughter had disappeared. Beside herself with grief, Ceres began searching for her kidnapped daughter in every land. For 9 days the goddess did not rest, but carried 2 torches through the cold nights, searching for Proserpina. On the 10th day, Hecate, goddess of the dark of the moon, came to Ceres. Holding up a lantern, the shrouded goddess said, "I also heard your daughter's screams, but I didn't see her. Let us fly to Helios, the sun god, and ask him what happened." Ceres and Hecate flew to Helios, the sun god, and weeping, Ceres asked Helios if he'd seen her daughter while he was shining down upon the woods. "I pity you, Ceres," said Helios, "for I know what it is to lose a child. But I know the truth. Pluto wanted Proserpina for his wife, so he asked his brother, Jupiter, to give him permission to kidnap her. Jupiter gave his consent, and now your daughter reigns over the land of the dead with Pluto." Ceres screamed in rage and thrust her fist toward Mount Olympus, cursing Jupiter for aiding in the kidnapping of his own daughter. Then she returned to Earth, disguised as an old woman, and began wandering from town to town. One day, as she rested by a well, Ceres watched 4 princesses gathering water. Remembering her own daughter, she began to weep. "Where are you from, old woman?" one princess asked. "I was kidnapped by pirates, and I escaped," said Ceres. "Now I know not where I am." Feeling pity for her, the princesses brought Ceres home to their palace. At the palace, their mother, the queen, took an immediate liking to Ceres when she noticed how good she was with her baby son, the prince. When she asked Ceres if she would live with them and be his nurse, the goddess gladly consented. Ceres grew deeply fond of the child. The thought that he would someday grow old and die was too much for her to bear. So she decided to change him from a mortal to a god. Every night, when everyone else was asleep, she poured a magic liquid on the body of the baby prince and held him in a fire. Soon the prince began to look like a god. Everyone was amazed at his beauty and strength. The queen, disturbed by the changes in her child, hid in the nursery and watched Ceres and the boy, and when she saw Ceres place the child into the fire, she screamed for help. "Stupid woman," shouted Ceres, snatching the baby from the fire. "I was going to make your son a god. He would have lived forever. Now he'll be a mere mortal and die like the rest of you." The king and queen then realized that the boy's nurse was Ceres, the powerful goddess of grain, and they were terrified. "I will only forgive you," said Ceres, "if you build a great temple in my honor. Then I will teach your people the secret rites to help the corn grow." At dawn, the king ordered a great temple to be built for the goddess. But after the temple was completed, Ceres did not reveal the secret rites. Instead, she sat by herself all day, grieving for her kidnapped daughter. She was in such deep mourning that everything on earth stopped growing. It was a terrible year. There was no food, and people and animals began to starve. Jupiter grew worried. If Ceres caused the people on earth to die, there would be no more gifts and offerings for him. Finally, he sent gods from Mount Olympus to speak with her. The gods came to Ceres and offered her gifts and pleaded with her to make the earth fertile again. "I never will," she said, "not unless my daughter is returned safely to me." Jupiter had no choice but to bid his son Mercury, the messenger god, to return Proserpina to her mother. Wandering the underworld, Mercury passed through dark, smoky caverns filled with ghosts and phantoms until he came to the misty throne room of Pluto and Proserpina. Though the maiden was still frightened, she had grown accustomed to her new home and had almost forgotten her life on earth. "Your brother Jupiter has ordered you to return Proserpina to her mother," Mercury told Pluto. "Otherwise, Ceres will destroy the earth." Pluto knew he could not disobey Jupiter, but he didn't want his wife to leave forever, so he said, "She can go, but first we must be alone." When Mercury left, Pluto spoke softly to Proserpina. "If you stay, you'll be queen of the underworld, and the dead will give you great honors." As Proserpina stared into the eyes of the king of the dead, she dimly remembered the joy of her mother's love. She remembered wild flowers in the woods and open sunlit meadows. "I would rather return," she whispered. Pluto sighed, then said, "All right, go. But before you leave, eat this small seed of the pomegranate fruit. It is the food of the underworld. It will bring you good luck." Proserpina ate the tiny seed. Then Pluto's black chariot carried her and Mercury away. The two stallions burst through the dry ground of earth, then galloped over the barren countryside to the temple where Ceres mourned for her daughter. When Ceres saw her daughter coming, she ran down the hillside, and Proserpina sprang from the chariot into her mother's arms. All day the two talked excitedly of what had happened during their separation. But when Proserpina told Ceres about eating the pomegranate seed, the goddess hid her face and moaned in anguish. "What have I done?" cried Proserpina. "You have eaten the sacred food of the underworld," said Ceres. "Now you must return for half of every year to live with Pluto, your husband." And this is how the seasons began. For when fall and winter come, the earth grows cold and barren, because Proserpina lives in the underworld with Pluto, and her mother mourns. But when her daughter comes back to her, Ceres, goddess of grain, turns the world to spring and summer. The corn grows, and everything flowers again.